everybody. Welcome to Living the Next Chapter. I have a great guest with me today. Larry Olsen wrote the book, Get a Vision and Live It. He's also a podcast host of the Mindset Playbook podcast. Great interview with Larry, talking about mindset, how to shape your thinking, and how to use the powers of your mind for good and not for evil. So Larry has a great podcast episode here for us, a great interview. And I really, really enjoyed reading his book and having a chance to speak with him in person. And I hope you enjoy it. Here it is, podcast with Larry Olsen on Living the Next Chapter. Thanks for listening, guys. Here we go. Hello, everybody. This is Dave. Welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have a wonderful guest, somebody that I have been reading and listening to very much over the last few weeks. And I have learned a lot, and I have a lot of questions. So I'm very happy to have with me today Larry Olsen. And the book that I've been going through is Get a Vision and Live It. And he also has the Mindset Playbook podcast. Great podcaster, great author, a man that comes with excellent wisdom, knowledge, and he just seems like such a nice guy on top of everything else, which I appreciate. So we're going to talk to Larry today. And we're going to get some of his insight into his book, maybe a little bit even on the writing process of writing a book to help encourage other authors. And I just want to welcome Larry to the podcast today. Larry, thank you so much for taking time and looking forward to our conversation today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be on your show.
Excellent. So how old is the book, Get a Vision and Live It?
As time flies, it's about 10 years old now.
Excellent. So Larry, tell me about the process of writing the book and what the book has done for you as an author as far as opening doors and helping you in your teachings.
Well, the origins of the book are working with clients, and an audience member years ago came up to me and he said, this is really great information because it's made such rapid changes in my own perspective. And what are you going to do when you die? That was the first thing that came out of his mouth. And I paused and said, well, I'll probably die. But, he wanted to know, what am I going to do with the information? And so it got me thinking. And it took me a couple of years after that to really recognize that I wasn't going to be able to start a book until I started the book. And I think sometimes what you do is you come up with all these reasons in your head about why now is not a good time to begin. And I think we do that in a lot of areas of our lives. And in particular, the other thing that came up for me is, well, I'm not an author. I can communicate back and forth with people. I could write a letter if I had to, but I really didn't consider myself an author. And I think that's probably the biggest stopping point for anybody is you are the author of your own story, of your own life. And it's erroneous for you to say, I'm not an author. I think that may be something that you consider when you're thinking about your ability to write or what kind of a reader you are or whatever. But nobody can tell your story like you can tell your story. So that was kind of the beginning of it. And I worked on it. It took me a little over a year. And that was I was doing probably about 3 to 4 hours every couple, 2-3 days, and trying to be as consistent as I can. I was doing a lot of flying. So when I was on a plane, I was writing, and then there's the editing. And once you get through that, then you pass it out to other individuals and they've got their perspectives and their comments and questions. And so by the time you filtered that out, and the book that you see now is the 3rd edition. So it has been tweaked as well, because as you gain more information on, especially in my field of how the brain processes information, and it seems to be one of the last great frontiers outside of the ocean about what we're able to discover, we're really finding out how truly miraculous we are as a human being. And so I made a lot of updates, and the edition that you read is the latest edition. And what it has done, to answer the other part of your question, it's amazing how much credibility one gets when they have authored a book. in spite of what you might think yourself of the credibility of the book, in the sense of, well, anybody could have written it, or, everybody knows this, or I don't know if my style was easy to understand, or we can really be our own worst critic. And getting over that is recognizing, again, in the history of man, there are guesstimates that 100 billion people have stood upright in this thing called planet Earth in the history of man. And we've got about 7 billion now, and not one has our fingerprint or genetic blueprint. So don't be concerned about anybody being able to write a better story about yourself than you can, because nobody can interpret us as we can ourselves. Now, it's not always accurate, but that's kind of a long answer to a short question for you.
And so getting into the book, I'd love to chat a little bit about the things that are in between those covers, because you definitely did challenge me, and I want to thank you for that. How we live our life, I know for myself and other people that I've come across, daily life can just become kind of a routine, and we're not really fully engaged, and we just kind of, I think autopilot's a good word to describe it. You just do your day, and days become weeks, and weeks and become months, and we just kind of live life, and there's really no purpose. And the mind is such a powerful thing that if we can harness it, and if we can understand how the mind processes information and how it leads us, I think our entire life would be different. And your book takes us down that path. So can you kind of give like an overview to someone who hasn't read the book yet, but will read the book after this podcast, about how we can engage and utilize our mind, and how that can direct and lead us?
Well, I would love to do that. I think it all begins by having the audience right now recognize that they have a conversation going on with themselves. And we have about 50,000 thoughts that go through our mind in a 24-hour period of time. Those thoughts accumulate to build what are called beliefs. And we will fight for our beliefs and let others die for theirs. I mean, we are very, very adamant about being right. And what one has to ask themselves is, how is my life going? Am I pumped when I get up in the morning? Do I feel blessed that I have another day to participate in this thing called life? Or do I go, no, I got to do this, and I got to do that, and then I'm going to do that. And everything we start thinking about also has an emotion attached to it, stored neurologically in the cell of our brain. And these emotions, 95% of these emotions, Dave, were put in there years and years and years ago. Some of them could have been the last 5 minutes, but most of them are pretty historic, because there's no timeline on how long our brain will have an emotion. And we think it'll be a lifetime. And so it's, which emotions are we responding to? And how do we change that if every time I think about work, I don't feel excited? So what am I going to do? Am I going to find another job? And then, is it going to be any different when I find the other job? And what most people do when they don't know how to change their mind is they try to change the environment around them. I'll go to get a new spouse. I'll move and leave the country. I'll get another job. And, all of these things sound very romantic. And in the beginning, one starts to recognize that, yeah, things are a little different. But it won't take long, because the way our brain is designed, it's designed for predictability. The brain stores information, and a lot of the role of the amygdala, or our reptilian brain, is to make sure that the next time we hear the rustle in the grass, we don't have to get gnarled by that Bengal tiger. We only have to get gnarled once if we're able to survive, to recognize that we're real sensitive to the sound of grass from that point forward. Now, isn't that interesting? We'd heard all this rustle of grass our whole life, but it really never made an impact until that event occurred. That event could be a divorce. It could be a firing. It could be someone saying, I really don't care for you. It could be some type of information that gets us to say, wow. It could be, you're the most amazing person I've ever met. God, I'm just so blessed to have you in my presence. Doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. If it's significant, we store it. Now, you talked about people just kind of going through their lives, going through the day-by-day experiences. Psychologists say that we spend 95% of our day unconscious. And what that means is we've got all these attitudes and beliefs and habits, expectations built up in our mind. And so all it has to do is react to whatever situation occurs. And all we have to do is kind of think about that is, what's tonight going to be like for you? And when people stop and think, where do they get all that information to decide how tonight is going to be? Well, how was last night? Okay, what was this morning like? I mean, are they still going to be upset when I get home? Or are they still going to be excited when I got up home because they were so disappointed to see me leave? We're very seldom, Dave, are we blown away by an experience. It's pretty much just about what we expected. And this is where we have all the power and the opportunity to make changes in our lives if we're finding these recurring events not being exciting or rewarding for us or those around us. Is why are we doing what we're doing? And this is where we get into our sense of purpose and the real core to the outcomes that we get in our lives and why we're experiencing it the way we're experiencing it. And as the book says, this is where we need a vision. Mm-hmm. And typically a new one, because the old one, if we're not enjoying our lives, for instance, is worn out, or we gave up on, or we've did a bit of sacrificing along the way, and kind of it's not quite as exciting as it once was when we were maybe younger or first came up with it. So that's a lot of information in a short period of time.
And the one thing I remember going through and listening in the book is you talk about your rocks talks. And I was very intrigued by that passages and what you were writing in there. Can you talk a little bit about rocks talks?
Yeah, rocks talk is a term I coined. It's an acronym. Mm-hmm. ROX. Every time we think about something or experience something, whether it be internal or external, what happens neurologically in the cells of our brain is we record one, and then I took a little poetic license and said experience and started with an X. So ROX stands for recording one experience. And as I mentioned before, we do that over 50,000 times in a 24-hour period of time consciously. What's going on with the unconscious is a whole nother topic. But what happens is, as I use the example, if you think of Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water, and they have the little water buckets and a yoke over their shoulder, and let's say they have two 10-pound buckets. And if they're the same weight, they're pretty balanced. But if one has a little more weight in it, they lean in that direction. Another one, they lean in the other direction. And why this is important is we have what's called attitudes. And those of you that are interested in your performance and how you're doing in life, you might ask yourself, what percentage of my performance is based on my attitude? And what you're going to find out, 100%, it doesn't kind of affect it, it dominates it. Now think about that. Attitudes dominate my performance. Is that genetic? Absolutely not. Attitudes are learned behaviors. We're not born with them. And by the time a child is 10, they have over 100,000 attitudes.
Wow.
100,000. Hey, would you like some spinach? No, I wouldn't. Why not? Well, it doesn't taste good. Well, how do you know it doesn't taste good? Well, a friend of mine tried it and they didn't like it. And sometimes we don't even have to be the one. We see someone in class raise their hand and get ridiculed for their answer. We're a little reluctant to raise our hand until we're absolutely sure we have the right answer. And these are These are attitudes that are designed to protect us. Remember, our brain's job is to keep us alive and propagating so that we can continue the species. That was its origin. Now it allows us to be prosperous. It allows us to have the time of our life, or it allows us scarcity and wish that we didn't have to go through another day. And we all live within that spectrum. But the brain was designed for us to live in abundance and with prosperity. We didn't get 100 billion neurons, each one capable of storing 3 to 5 million bits of information, as a cosmic joke. What we got those for is for our imagination. I mean, just all we have to do is go back to children to see how to live and all the curiosity and how much they're looking forward. Well, when you accumulate all this information over time, you're actually looking backward. You're going into the future, looking through the rearview mirror. And that's why growth isn't very popular. So I came up with the rocks talk concept to recognize that while you're thinking, you're dropping rocks in buckets that are going to lean you in that direction. So why would anybody want to be thinking about things that aren't going to make them show up as the best version of themselves, bring out the best in another human being? And again, it gets back to vision. If they don't have one, or a sense of purpose, they really don't have a North Star. They don't have the guide. For instance, my purpose is to raise the self-esteem in the human race one person at a time. Now, it's not novel. You know, I may have heard something like that before. But as I'm driving down the road and I come to a stop sign and I see someone walk across the street, and maybe they've given me the impression that they're not a wonderful human being, or they're not taking care of themselves, and I'm about to get judgmental, which all of us are. Again, that's to protect ourselves, but some people goes above and beyond, and all they're doing is judging everything around them. I go, wait a minute. Are you raising the self-esteem of that individual with that kind of thought? Nope. Well, what kind of thought should you have? Well, there's a very loving person. You know, I don't know what their story is. You know, and if I had the time and wasn't going where I'm going, I would find out what their story is. Because we can't really make up our mind. I mean, your book's about authors, about judging a book by its cover, for crying out loud. Human beings are great at that, but we do it with other people. We do it with situations. We do it with what we hear. You know, you want to go out tonight? No. Well, we haven't even talked about where we're going to go. Well, what were you thinking? Well, there's a new restaurant in town. No. Well, why not? Well, again, where are we going? We're going back to the past. But if your vision is you look forward to new opportunities and you seize them with enthusiasm and excitement, you have to stop yourself, don't you? And this is that gap we talk about in the book, where you're doing kind of a timeout and going, whoa, I just about got driven by past beliefs again. What do I want to have happen? Well, I'd like to go on an adventure with my spouse. Wow, they brought up an opportunity to go out to a place for dinner, you know, and I might be around strangers. And before I would have said no because, you know, I'm kind of uncomfortable when I'm around people I don't know, if that's your belief. And can you see how these beliefs just continue to take over if people don't understand them and what to do about them?
And so, Larry, my assumption is that this book doesn't just come from head knowledge from yourself, but it might be a learned lesson as well. Was there a lesson that kind of brought you to writing this book?
Yeah. The lesson came from my sister. And, you know, I'll date myself now, but back in the late 40s, I popped out of the womb, and I had an older sister. And after about, you know, I think I was close to a year, maybe 8 months, I was pushing my sister in the stroller. Now, she's 3 years older than I am. And so I don't know if my folks were in denial or what was going on, but they said that something's wrong with this picture. You know, she is a little delayed here now that we've got Larry and we're seeing the difference. And not that they hadn't noticed before, but they went and they had her tested, and things were pretty barbaric then. They labeled her mentally retarded. And we call it gifted now, differently abled. I mean, it's just so much, there is such a great evolution as far as how we're taking care of that now. It's not perfect, but it's much better. And I got into a lot of fights, Dave, when I was little. Because, we can mess with our family, but when someone else's messes with our family, that's kind of the line in the sand. If people don't think they have a sense of purpose, and they certainly do when it comes to family. You don't have to ask themselves, what should I do now? I mean, they just jump right in. I just jump into a fight because somebody had said something cruel to my sister. Well, then I started wondering, why do people act like that? Why are people mean? And these are good friends of mine. And then some of them were, then I learned that people are uncomfortable with differences, and sometimes making fun or is a way for them to be a little more comfortable with their discomfort. But that's where my quest began, and I started studying about how the brain operates at a very early age. And then it just became fascinating, and ultimately I created a business around it.
Interesting. So the one thing that came out in the book as well when I was reading was to accept yourself first. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that was something that I think a lot of people need to hear, because we focus so much on everyone else's approval of us and where we fit in the whole scheme of life, in our family, in our job, wherever. We're always trying to find and create our space, but to accept ourselves first. Can you kind of just briefly touch on that as well?
Yeah, I'm just so pleased with you reading the book, and how these are great questions. You're really lobbing them to me, and I like that.
It's good.
I was teaching high school psychology years and years ago, and it was a spring day in Washington. And when that happens, everybody wants to be outside. And these are juniors in college, and I had to get their attention. So I said, how would you like to go through life and never be rejected? And as soon as I said that, the young lady in the front row started crying, because she'd worn this orange jumpsuit to school, and apparently she'd been getting all kinds of negative comments. And so she just broke up. And I kind of relaxed, got her to calm down a little bit, and then we went on with the lesson. And I said, what would you need to do to never experience rejection? And people said, oh, don't get out of bed, don't try anything. And they came up with all these different answers that, as long as you don't move, you're probably in no danger of getting rejected. Well, I had a student in the back of the room who was not vocal whatsoever. He was pleasant and he wasn't disruptive, but he never really shared. And this was almost to the end of the semester. And after all these kids are trying to figure out how to go through life without being rejected, he raises his hand. And I thought, well, this is going to be interesting. We're now finally going to hear from him. And I said, yeah, what's your idea on this? And he goes, it's easy. And I said, what's that? And he goes, accept yourself first. And it just hit me like a bolt of lightning, which the simplicity that came out of the mouth of a 17-year-old who, when you looked at him, realized he'd done that. And it had changed his life, and that comment had changed mine, because I think all of us, because rejection is the number one fear of mankind. That's why we're social creatures, and we can't exist. It's hard to exist on your own. And anyway, that's where that comment came from. And I would share with the audience is, how do you do that? How do you accept yourself first? Well, Dave, you know what the shortest distance between 2 points is? What most people think? It's a straight line. Right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. It's actually a leap of faith. And by everybody stating now that I am an incredible human being that brings out the best in others, that's a leap of faith. That's a proclamation. Faith is a belief in that which is yet unseen. It's not necessarily spiritual. It's you have a faith that you'll get to work, and then you get in a car, and the next thing you know, you're at work. but it started out with faith. We have faith in things that aren't good. We have faith in things that are good. But when we set that vision, when we decide that this moment is the most important moment of my life, and as you and I discussed earlier, what better time to start anything than right now? And if you go, yeah, but you started before and you're not a finisher, that's looking through the rearview mirror again. And that's where you've got to stop and go, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm not going to keep living who I used to be. I'm going to live who I want to be. And one last little point here I wanted to share is very few people know who they are, but almost everyone knows what they've become in every area of their life. And when you discover who you are through spirituality, through science, you will find that you always will come up with the same answer relative to the human species. And that is a miracle, and that is absolutely an amazing creature capable of doing anything that they will allow themselves to do. And you can choose to allow yourself to do it.
Mm-hmm. It's very inspirational, Larry, really.
Oh, thank you.
And that's why I think I really resonated with the book is you bring this out in so many different ways and examples and stories, and you can tell the book was written with passion.
Well, thank you.
A passion for what you are speaking of and what you're speaking to. And I know we've come through a global pandemic, and all that has changed how we do life and how we do business. How are you doing okay with your business? And I know you would do like conferences and things like that as well. Are you coming out on the other side of this now and rebuilding?
Yeah, I had set up a university for a client in Washington, and it was a 10-year event, and I was 4 years into it. It was kind of going to be the heyday. This was how I was going to kind of wrap up my business adventure and then go into keynote speaking. And then the pandemic hit on March 13th. I had no audience any longer, no students anymore, because the facility was closed down based on what was required in the laws at that time. And I've never been back. And this March is 2 years now. So in the meantime, one of the first reactions is to tuck up in a fetal position, pull the blankets over you, put your thumb in your mouth, and be done.
Yeah.
And I recognize that knowing what I know, it's so important not to lose sight of the vision. And, I didn't. I'd almost lost sight of the vision in 2008, where I had 95% of my income gone in 2 weeks. When everybody now was in business, is letting people go like me, because at the time it's kind of like I was like the music department in the school, and they had a budget crunch.
Yeah.
Well, what are they going to cut out? And so in human development, we don't need that. We just need to sell. And so that I realized then that I had the wrong vision, because I was trying to relive the old vision. So I had to create a new one for myself. And it didn't take long where I was back in action again. But it's amazing how creative you get when you don't lose sight of the vision. And the vision was to be able to impact thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, millions. I mean, there was no limit on it, by making myself present. And that's when I decided to develop a podcast. And then to get new clients on, 4 months ago, I decided to develop one in the automotive industry, because I had some clients in the past in the automotive industry. And that university was an automotive industry, if you can believe that. And they were very, very cutting edge. And meet general managers through the podcast on a very safe, non-selling position, and then to build up the relationship. And then they invited me to come out to the store, and then we looked around the store, and then they found out what I did. And so now I'm back in business again. But that was a 2-year hiatus, left with myself and my spouse, and family, but left in your own mind. about, am I of value anymore? Do I have any credibility? Am I relevant? And I think a lot of us go through this. And this is, they called it the Great Resignation. I like kind of like the Great Reinspiration, that we're really having the opportunity now to realize I've really got to be spending my life doing what I like. And if I can't find that because there's not that particular job out there, I need to find it within the job I have. You know, it's like I mentioned to you before that I had a bet with a buddy years and years ago. 1983, we had this bet who had the most jobs, and we got done adding them up. I had 23, he had 22. I beat him by 1. And there were 2 elements that went on in each job. And I'm talking construction company, teaching school. I'm not talking about bagging groceries, cutting hair. I mean, you name, we could go on, and I could tell you about all these different jobs I had. But the important point was, and I would want everybody to think about this, the important point was when I didn't take long before what happened within the job is I wasn't being respected or paid enough. So then I'd go get a new job, and didn't take long before I wasn't what?
Same thing. Yep. Exactly. Yep.
And after a while, you know, I'm not the sharpest student on the block, but after a while, I realized there was a common denominator. Who did I keep bringing to each job? And what I recognized was I was changing my jobs, not changing my mind. Mm-hmm. And so this is how powerful our brain is. I actually did things subconsciously to find disrespect, create disrespect, or find somebody who was making more money than I would, so I could be right about I wasn't going to be respected I wasn't going to be respected or paid enough. Now, every listener is doing something to be right about something. Stop and think what it is you're trying to be right about. Because when I applied the education that's in the book and in my life, I realized that, look who you're bringing. And I made a transformation about a proclamation of who do you want to show up the next time you bring Larry with you. Mm-hmm. And it was not change, it was a transformation. And Jane Gusto has a great quote about the difference. Change is a chameleon turning from brown to green. Transformation is a caterpillar emerging as a glorious butterfly. Mm-hmm. Let's not change, let's transform and give ourselves the opportunity to really find out how miraculous we really are.
It's excellent, Larry. And I want you to know, as somebody who's read your book has changed a lot of my thought patterns, and you have had a huge impact on me. So the chance to speak to you today is I consider a privilege to do that. So,
thank you.
To write a book 10 plus years ago with no idea of a global pandemic in the future.
Yeah.
I think this book is something that could definitely help somebody who is struggling right now.
Thank you.
And I think the timeliness of what's written, there's some timeless things here. And I think this book would be wonderful for somebody who doesn't know what their vision is. So before we close off, because I know you have to jump to another podcast, how is a person who's unaware of their vision, how will this book help them to nail down a vision so that they can start taking steps forward instead of looking back all the time?
There are exercises within the book that give the person the opportunity to go from, I don't like this, to the question, what would it be like if it was the way you wanted it to be? And that is called backing into a vision. Most people know more about what they don't want than what they do want. And so when I don't like the way someone is treating me, or I don't like the way they're promoting people in this job, right? Well, what would you like to have happen? Well, I would like to get promoted. Well, what type of a person are they going to promote? Someone who's being upset because they didn't get promoted? Somebody who's finding fault with those around them because they work harder than that person does and that person got? Who's going to hire that person? No wonder I was getting laid off, because I was looking for respect and I always wanted more money. Now, generally, and what I've learned is that's a byproduct of bringing the best you to whatever circumstance you find yourself in. And this vision element is take baby steps. And one of the baby steps is, what can you do right now or in the next hour or so to make a positive impact on another human being? And, when someone's birthday, we go out of our way to find a present, or if it's a special holiday. But do we live that every single day? Are we looking for the opportunity to be the best version of ourselves around the people in our lives, whether we like those people or not? Everybody is here for the same reason, if you want to know what your true purpose is, and that's to make a difference. And we all do. And the question to ask yourself is, what kind of difference do you want to make? And as soon as you ask that, one vision pops up after another, and then there's a format to be able to write them down so that your subconscious, which accepts literally what you say to yourself or another, it does not know whether you're kidding or not. So when someone says, how could I have been so stupid? You imprint stupid in your subconscious. Mm-hmm. And you will, without knowing it, look for another opportunity to say, wow, that was stupid. And so it's vision, as you mentioned, is changing how you see yourself and then reminding yourself of it. And there's a multitude of ways to do that, from putting it on a mirror to writing it down to, whatever works best for you. But then there's the control of what happens when things don't work. Do you go, well, so much for the vision. I tried it and it didn't work. This is about really commitment. Are you really interested in change? Are you interested in transformation? And if you're interested in change, you can try and you will have little incremental changes all around you, but you will never transform into what it is you want to be, because that requires a proclamation. I bring out the best in those that I come in contact with. There's no if they're nice, if the situation presents itself, if I have the time, none of that can come up. You either are doing it or you're not. And when you start practicing that, watch what happens to your self-esteem and your self-worth. Because that's what holds most people back anyway, is self-worth. And our society has done a pretty good job of making that difficult.
Yes.
Not on purpose, just, every good news newspaper in the United States has gone out of business.
Yes, exactly. And what I like to, Larry, when you talk about having an impact on one person's life, and when you mention the person crossing in front of you on the street and how you can impact that life, you did that for me, Larry, and I just want to thank you for that. Reading the book 10 years ago, you didn't think of a guy in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, who would get you on his podcast and talk to you about your book. But when you sat down and wrote that, you had an impact on me, and I really do appreciate it. It's something that's it's been very meaningful for me, and I'm going to have to go back and listen again, because I know there's more in there that as I live life and as I experience things and I learn new things, as I come back to the book, I will hear and experience more things from your book a second, third, fourth time through, because I'll be more receptive based on my current life and what's going on in my current life, right? So it's a book that you can't just read this once and put it on the shelf. It's something you definitely need to come back to. So thank you, Larry, for writing this. Thank you for being willing to come on and chat today. And again, I just wanted to thank you for writing this for me. I really do appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. And you really have a great show. You've got a big heart. And you're a great example of how to bring out the best in others is to make it about others. And you've done that for me. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. I hope this starts your day off right, and your day continues to go well.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So Larry, how can everybody find you? How can they connect with you? what's the best way to get more Larry Olsen in our lives?
I would encourage you to go to our new website called Larry Olsen Live, no spaces, .com. Larry Olsen, and that's OLSEN, LarryOlsenLive.com. The book is called Get a Vision and Live It. And there is somebody out there that's selling the book. So when you go to Amazon, if you'd be so kind as to find the Get a Vision and Live It that's done by Apernio, APERNEO, Apernio.com. But however you go ahead and grab it, all the best to you. And, it's not a bumper sticker when you say today is the first day of the rest of my life. It's when you learn how to live like that, does it really become something meaningful?
Thank you for being meaningful in my life. I appreciate it, Larry, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for being on Living the Next Chapter.
I love it. And all the best in the next chapter for your listeners.
Thank you very much, Larry. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, guys. This is Dave from Living the Next Chapter, a podcast designed to connect authors and audiences. We're always on the lookout for our next interview. If you're an author, a publisher, and you have a book, whether you're just starting, whether you're halfway through writing, or it's all done and you want to tell the world, that's why we're here at Living the Next Chapter. Get in touch with us through livingthenextchapter.com, contact us, and let's set up some time together to discuss your book, to discuss your project, and how we can get you on the show. My name is Dave, and I would love to speak to you. So go to livingthenextchapter.com, and let's get over there together and discuss all the great things that you're up to as an author, as a publisher, and let's grow your audience together. Join us on livingthenextchapter.com for great authors and an audience that's eager to hear about what you're up to as an author and a publisher. Contact us today, and let's get your book out in front of others. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.
Mindshift Power Podcast, the podcast for teenagers and those who work with them. There's a huge problem in America today. There's a very large disconnect between teenagers and the adults who work with them. I'm looking to bridge that gap with real, raw, honest conversation, not held back by the chains of political correctness. You cannot solve a problem you do not understand. Want to understand teenagers today? Listen to this podcast. This podcast is for teens in the U.S. and Canada. To learn more, go to fatimabay.com/podcast or just look for Mindshift Power Podcast on any listening platform. I look forward to you being a faithful listener.